Nowhere, because Will has something going on inside him. You do not have the right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words.
When Jim Carrey broke his silence about what really happened at the Oscars, nobody expected what came next. The man who made us laugh for decades wasn't joking anymore, and what he revealed about Will Smith and Hollywood's dark underbelly left everyone speechless. But here's what makes this different. This isn't just another celebrity feud. This is two comedy legends, Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy, finally saying what everyone in Hollywood has been too afraid to whisper. And once you hear what they exposed, you'll never look at the entertainment industry the same way again. The night everything changed. Let me ask you something. Do you remember where you were when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars? Of course you do. The whole world stopped. Social media exploded. Everyone had an opinion. But what happened immediately after the slap was even more disturbing than the violence itself. Will Smith sat back down in his seat, and then something bizarre happened. The entire room, filled with Hollywood's most powerful people, gave him a standing ovation. They applauded a man who had just committed assault on live television. They celebrated him, they protected him, and that's when Jim Carrey knew he had to speak up. "I was sickened," Carrey said in an interview that would shake Hollywood to its core. "I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless en masse. It really felt like, oh, this is a really clear indication that we're not the cool club anymore."
I was sickened. I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless.
Think about that for a second. Jim Carrey, one of the biggest comedy stars in history, calling out the entire industry as spineless. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a bit. This was a man who had spent decades inside the machine, finally pulling back the curtain. Why Jim Carrey's words matter? Now you might be wondering, why should we care what Jim Carrey thinks? Fair question, but here's what you need to understand. Jim Carrey isn't some bitter has-been trying to stay relevant. This is a man who literally reinvented what it meant to be a movie star in the 1990s. Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, The Truman Show, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Carrey built an empire on his own terms. He took risks when others played it safe. He chose artistic integrity over easy paychecks. And most importantly, he has absolutely nothing to gain and nothing to lose by telling the truth. When someone like that speaks up, you listen. But Carrey wasn't alone. Enter Eddie Murphy, the other comedy giant who decided enough was enough. Eddie Murphy drops the bomb. Eddie Murphy is a legend, period. Before Jim Carrey was even famous, Eddie Murphy was shaping the entire landscape of comedy. His stand-up specials, delirious and raw, changed the game forever. His movies defined an entire generation. But here's something you might not know about Eddie Murphy. He hates Hollywood. He despises the fake smiles, the pretend friendships, the desperate trophy hunting at awards shows. He once said, "One of the reasons why I don't go to award shows, the feeling of being in a room full of famous people who all want to win some trophy, that feeling is such a tight feeling. Everybody's dressed and acting and fake. Just being in a room full of famous people is just weird. I don't like it." So when Eddie Murphy, who spent decades avoiding all of this Hollywood nonsense, suddenly decided to show up at the 81st Golden Globes to accept the Cecil B. DeMille Award, people paid attention. And when he used that platform to take a direct shot at Will Smith, the message was clear. Pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name.
Pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out your mouth!
The audience erupted. Some laughed nervously. Others sat in stunned silence. But everyone understood exactly what Murphy was saying. This wasn't just a clever punchline. This was a calculated strike against everything Will Smith represented. And Murphy later clarified that it wasn't just a joke to him. He was making a point about toxic masculinity, about Hollywood's hypocrisy, about the fake performances these celebrities put on for the cameras. When a man who has successfully stayed out of Hollywood drama for decades suddenly decides to enter the arena, you better believe he has something important to say. The psychology behind the slap. But Jim Carrey didn't just criticize the industry's reaction. He went deeper, much deeper. And this is where things get really interesting. Carrey analyzed what he believed was going on inside Will Smith's head, and in his typical philosophical way, He went straight to the psychological root of the situation. He said the whole thing wasn't about defending Jada. It was about frustration, pure, ego-driven frustration. Listen to how Carrey explained it. Will Smith created this image of himself over decades, and he's trapped inside it. Carrey called it an avatar, a fake identity that demands constant validation, that needs everyone to see him as a protector, as the hero, as the perfect family man. And when Chris Rock made a joke about Jada's hair, it wasn't just a joke to Will Smith. It was an attack on his carefully constructed image. It was someone pulling back the curtain on the persona he'd spent 30 years building, and his reaction was to protect that image at all costs, even if it meant slapping someone on live television in front of billions of people. It didn't escalate. It came out of nowhere because Will has something going on inside him that's frustrated, Carrey said. And I wish him the best. I really do. I don't have anything against Will Smith. That last part is crucial. Carrey wasn't attacking Will Smith as a person. He was exposing the system that created him. He was revealing how Hollywood builds these fake personalities and then protects them no matter what they do, as long as they keep making money. The $9 billion man. And that's the key to understanding all of this. Money. For 3 decades, Will Smith was part of Hollywood's elite circle. His movies grossed over $9 billion worldwide. Let me repeat that. $9 billion. Studios would bend over backwards to keep him happy. Awards shows would roll out the red carpet. The media treated him like this perfect family man who had figured out life. But here's what Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy both understood. Hollywood doesn't protect people because of friendship. It doesn't protect people because of morals. It protects people because of money. As long as Will Smith was making everyone rich, nobody was going to say anything about his behavior, his marriage, or any of the weird stuff happening behind closed doors. We saw a wall of protection built up around him. Anytime something strange happened, anytime there were rumors, anytime people wanted to ask questions, the industry collectively decided to look the other way. Why? Because he made them too much money to risk losing. And that's exactly what Jim Carrey was pointing out when he called Hollywood spineless. The standing ovation wasn't about supporting Will Smith as a person. It was about protecting the investment. It was about sending a message. We don't care what you do as long as you keep making us rich. The curtain gets pulled back. But here's the thing about live television. You can't edit it. You can't control it. And once that slap happened, there was no going back. The corruption became visible. The machine was exposed. Jim Carrey made another crucial point that a lot of people missed. He said that Chris Rock should have pressed charges. What Will Smith did was assault. It was caught on camera. It was witnessed by millions of people. But Chris Rock decided not to file charges because he didn't want the hassle. He didn't want to become a target for trolls. He didn't want to go through the exhausting legal process that comes with being a celebrity plaintiff. However, Jim Carrey had a different take. He said if it was him, he would have announced that morning that he was suing Will for $200 million.
I'd have announced this morning that I was suing Will for $200 million.
Why? Because that video is going to exist forever. That insult is going to last a very long time. And the person who assaulted you should have to pay for that. Think about what that means. By not holding Smith legally accountable, Hollywood sent a clear message. Violence has consequences, but not if you're rich enough, not if you're powerful enough, not if you make the right people enough money. The red table talk deception. Now, if you really want to understand why Eddie Murphy and Jim Carrey both had issues with the Smiths, you need to look at what Red Table Talk was doing, because that show wasn't therapy. It was manipulation. Remember the episode where Jada admitted she'd had a relationship with August Alsina while she and Will were separated?
You know, as time went on, I got into a different kind of entanglement with August.
And Will sat there looking like this hurt husband who was going to forgive his wayward wife? The whole thing became a meme. People mocked their entire act. But here's what Carrey and Murphy both pointed out. This whole interview was a PR stunt. It was a calculated decision to turn their marriage problems into content, to monetize their pain, to make Will Smith a victim, a long-suffering husband who was going to forgive his wife. Do you see what happened there? By being the one who forgives, by being the one who cries on camera, Will controlled the narrative. He became the hero of his own scandal. and all those weird rumors about his own relationships suddenly got buried under the buzz of this interview. That's what Jim Carrey meant when he talked about the fake image Will Smith created. It showed me that there were characters being played everywhere, Carrey said. As an actor, you play characters, and then, if you go deep enough into those characters, you realize that your own character is pretty thin to begin with. The pattern of behavior. Once Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy opened the floodgates, people started asking questions that nobody wanted to ask before. And suddenly, all these stories that had been floating around the internet for years started making sense. Take the Janet Hubert situation from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. For those who don't know, Janet played Aunt Vivian for the first 3 seasons. Then she was suddenly replaced, and the official story was that she was difficult, unprofessional, and wanted to be the star of the show. Classic Hollywood takedown of a black woman who dared to stand up for herself. But according to Janet, she had a contract dispute. She was asking for fair pay, and when she refused to take a bad deal, the machine turned against her, and Will Smith, instead of supporting his co-star, led the charge in branding her as the problem. Years later, in a reunion episode, Janet shared her story sitting right beside Will. "Words can kill," she said. "I lost everything. Reputation, everything. And I understand you were able to move forward, but you know, calling a black woman difficult in Hollywood is the kiss of death."
We're able to move forward, but you know those words, calling a black woman difficult in Hollywood is the kiss of death.
This happened in 1993, over 30 years ago, and it was the first warning sign that people chose to ignore. The trailer incident. Here's another story that reveals who Will Smith really is. In 2012, while filming Men in Black 3 in New York City, Will Smith demanded that production rent him a massive double-decker trailer unit. We're talking about a 53-foot thing that cost $2 million. Now Will already had a luxury apartment in the city, but that wasn't good enough. He wanted this enormous trailer with a full gym inside, parked on the streets of Soho. It blocked traffic, it blocked businesses. It created a nightmare for residents with noise and fumes. When complaints started coming in, Will Smith refused to move it. This guy, who has hundreds of millions of dollars, who could have just taken a car to a nice hotel or used the apartment he already owned, insisted on keeping this massive trailer parked in a residential neighborhood. Why? Because that's what he wanted. And in his mind, the rules didn't apply to him. This isn't just celebrity privilege. This is the mindset of someone who has been protected for 30 years and told he's too special, too important, too valuable for the industry to hold accountable. The impact on comedy. But there's something even bigger at stake here. Something that Chris Rock, Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle, and Jim Carrey all understand. When someone walks up on stage and assaults a comedian for a joke, they're not just attacking one person. They're attacking the entire craft. There's an unwritten contract between comedians and audiences. The comedian is supposed to push boundaries. The audience is supposed to laugh, or not laugh, or roll their eyes, or walk out. But the one thing nobody is supposed to do is commit violence. Comedy is about freedom of speech. It's about being able to say uncomfortable things. It's about challenging power. And when powerful people decide they can physically attack comedians who make jokes they don't like, we all lose something important. Eddie Murphy said it best when he was asked about the joke landing the way he wanted. "I thought it went fine. It wasn't a punchline. It was just the end of my little acceptance speech. I thought it worked. That joke worked, didn't it?" The audience laughed because they knew he was right. They knew Will Smith had crossed a line. They knew someone needed to say it. The Avatar Theory. Let me take you back to something Jim Carrey said, because I think this is the most important part of his analysis. He talked about how Will Smith created this perfect image, the Fresh Prince, the family man, the actor who only does uplifting movies, and somewhere along the way, the image became more real than the person. He stopped being a human being with flaws and became a product that needed constant maintenance. "I don't believe in icons," Carrey said in another interview. "I don't believe in personalities. I believe that peace lies beyond personality, beyond invention and disguise, beyond the red S that you wear on your chest that makes bullets bounce off. I believe that it's deeper than that." That's a profound statement, because what Carrey is saying is that Will Smith has become so consumed by his own image, by his own avatar, that he's lost touch with who he actually is. He's trapped inside a character he's been playing for 3 decades. And the scariest part? He doesn't even realize it. Think about the psychology of that. Imagine spending 30 years pretending to be someone you're not. Imagine building your entire identity around an image. Imagine needing constant validation from millions of people just to feel like you're real. That's what Carrey saw in Will Smith's eyes that night at the Oscars. That's what drove him to slap Chris Rock. Not love for Jada, not righteous anger, just pure, desperate frustration that someone dared to crack the mask he'd been wearing his whole life. The industry's complicity. But here's what really gets me angry about this whole situation. It's not just Will Smith's fault. It's Hollywood's fault for creating him, for enabling him, for protecting him all these years. Remember what happened after the slap? They gave him an Oscar. They gave him a standing ovation. They let him give an acceptance speech where he compared himself to Richard Williams protecting his family.
Of King Richard and Venus and Serena, the entire Williams family.
Can you believe that? The man just assaulted someone on live television, and they're handing him a trophy and letting him paint himself as a hero. That's what Jim Carrey meant by spineless. That's what Eddie Murphy was calling out with his joke. The industry doesn't have principles. It doesn't have morals. It has bank accounts and profit margins and quarterly earnings reports. And as long as you're making money, they'll protect you no matter what you do. The beginning of the end. Fast forward to after the Oscars. Will Smith released a movie called Emancipation, and it was a disaster.
We did ask the Hollywood star Will Smith about the comeback film Emancipation.
The box office was disappointing. The awards attention was non-existent. For the first time in 30 years, Will Smith wasn't a safe bet anymore. Why? Because Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy started speaking out. Because they gave other people permission to ask questions. Because they showed that you don't have to play along with Hollywood's fake narratives. The fans' willingness to blindly support everything Will Smith does, it's gone. People started looking at his behavior differently. They started seeing the pattern, the way he humiliated Janet Hubert, the way he treats service workers, the way he creates drama and then plays the victim. The $9 billion man, the guy who was too big to fail, is discovering that there's a limit to how much bad behavior the industry will tolerate. Not because they have principles, but because supporting him has become bad business. And when supporting Will Smith starts looking like a financial risk, suddenly everyone's a lot more careful about how they associate themselves with him. Why this matters to you. Now you might be thinking, why should I care about celebrity drama? Here's why this matters. What Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy exposed isn't just about Will Smith, it's about power. It's about how systems protect certain people no matter what they do. It's about how money can buy immunity from consequences. Think about your own life. How many times have you seen someone get away with terrible behavior because they're too valuable to the system? How many times have you watched people applaud someone they know is wrong because speaking up would cost them something? That's what the standing ovation was. That's what Hollywood's protection of Will Smith represents. It's the same dynamic that plays out everywhere when powerful people do harmful things. And things are only changing because people like Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy decided to risk their comfort and tell the truth. The bigger picture. I'm not telling you to hate Will Smith. What I am telling you is to pay attention to what these two comedy legends revealed about how power works. Jim Carrey showed us that the entire industry is built on fake images and fake personalities. That the people we think we know on screen are just avatars designed to sell us products and make other people rich. Eddie Murphy showed us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play along. When he finally did show up, he used that moment to speak truth. Together, they pulled back the curtain on something we all suspected. Hollywood is spineless. It will protect anyone as long as they're making money, and it will throw you away the second you stop being profitable. The questions we should be asking. So here's what I want you to think about. When you see someone get a standing ovation for doing something wrong, ask yourself, why? When you see the media protect someone who clearly deserves criticism, ask yourself, what's the financial incentive? When you see people attacking the whistleblower instead of the person who did wrong, ask yourself, who benefits from that? Because that's what happened here. Chris Rock got slapped, and people attacked Chris Rock. Janet Hubert asked for fair pay, and people called her difficult. Jim Carrey spoke the truth, and some people called him bitter. The machine always protects itself. Always. Unless people like Eddie Murphy and Jim Carrey decide to break the cycle. The cost of speaking truth. Let me tell you something about what it takes to do what Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy did. It's easy to say, yeah, someone should speak up. It's different to actually be the person who does it. Jim Carrey was already semi-retired from Hollywood. He didn't need the industry anymore. But even for someone in his position, calling out the entire industry as spineless is a massive risk. Hollywood has a long memory. They blacklist people. They freeze people out. And Eddie Murphy? He'd spent decades building a reputation as someone who doesn't get involved in drama. For him to break that pattern and take a direct shot at Will Smith, that's not just a joke. That's a statement. Both men understood the potential consequences. They knew they might face backlash. They knew other celebrities might distance themselves. And they did it anyway. That's courage. That's what it looks like when you decide that telling the truth matters more than protecting your comfort. The gaslighting narcissist. Doug Ellen, the creator of Entourage.
Doug Ellen was out at Medeo. He's the writer, director, creator of Entourage.
Tweeted after the Oscars incident calling Will Smith a gaslighting narcissist who made the entire night about himself. That's a heavy accusation, but when you look at the pattern of behavior, it starts to make sense. A gaslighting narcissist manipulates situations to make themselves the victim. They twist narratives to serve their image. They make everything about them even when it's not supposed to be. The Oscar slap happened during someone else's moment. Chris Rock's hosting moment, Questlove's award acceptance, but Will made it about himself. He made himself the center of attention, the victim of a joke that went too far, the hero protecting his wife. The Red Table Talk episode? Same thing. Will structured the whole conversation to make himself the long-suffering husband, the forgiving partner, the man who would rise above it all. Janet Hubert's firing from Fresh Prince? Same pattern. She asked for fair pay, but Will made it about her being difficult, about her wanting to steal the spotlight. Every situation gets reframed to make Will Smith the center, the hero, the victim. That's what Jim Carrey recognized when he talked about the Avatar. The industry's response. Here's something fascinating that happened after Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy spoke out. The industry went silent. And that silence is more telling than any statement could be, because what it reveals is that everyone in Hollywood knows the truth. They've always known. They just didn't want to say it out loud because protecting Will Smith was more profitable than exposing him. But once Carrey and Murphy broke the seal, the wall of protection started crumbling. Studios that would have greenlit any Will Smith project suddenly became cautious. Awards shows that would have invited him with open arms suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Media outlets that would have given him softball interviews suddenly started asking harder questions. Not because they developed principles overnight, but because the cost-benefit analysis changed. Supporting Will Smith went from being good business to being risky business. The legacy. Years from now, people will see this as a turning point, not because of what Will Smith did. We've seen celebrities behave badly before. But because of what Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy did in response. They refused to play along. They refused to pretend everything was fine. They used their platforms to say what everyone else was too afraid to say. That matters. Because every time someone in power tells the truth, it makes it easier for the next person. Every time someone breaks the silence, it weakens the wall of protection around people who abuse their power. Jim Carrey didn't just criticize a standing ovation. He exposed an entire system. Eddie Murphy didn't just make a joke, he made a statement about who deserves protection. What comes next? For 30 years, Will Smith had nowhere to hide, but now, for the first time, the protection is gone, the image is cracked. And all of this happened because two comedy legends decided that truth was more important than comfort, that integrity was more valuable than access. So here's my question for you. What truth have you been too afraid to tell? What system have you been protecting because it's easier than speaking up? Because that's what this is really about. Not Will Smith, not Hollywood, not even Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy. It's about all of us, and whether we have the courage to stop playing along with systems that reward the wrong people for doing the wrong things. Final thoughts. Jim Carrey told the world the truth about Will Smith, about Hollywood, and about how power protects itself. Eddie Murphy backed him up, and now the conversation has started. Some people are angry, some are defensive, some are finally asking questions they should have asked years ago. Everyone is talking, everyone is thinking, everyone is reconsidering the stories they've been told. And that's exactly what truth is supposed to do. It's supposed to make you uncomfortable. It's supposed to challenge your assumptions. It's supposed to force you to see things differently. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to keep giving standing ovations to people who don't deserve them? Or will you be like Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy, someone who decides that truth matters more than comfort? Once you see the avatar for what it is, once you understand how the machine works, once you realize that the standing ovation was never about the person on stage, you can't unsee it. So drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy were right to speak out? Do you believe Hollywood's protection of Will Smith reveals something deeper about how power works? Subscribe if you want more content that pulls back the curtain on what's really happening in entertainment. The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth hearing. And remember, the only thing more powerful than a standing ovation is the courage to stay seated when everyone else is clapping for the wrong reasons. I'll see you in the next one.